below the horizon as we headed out from our bunkhouse to our blind. I had seen that beautiful moon twice during the night at different spots in the sky as I stumbled from the bunkhouse to Pop Squat. I usually have a hard time sleeping the night before opening morning of deer season, but this morning was the beginning of turkey season and I had actually slept quite well. I've never been a big turkey hunter, so I didn't exactly bounce out of bed like I would on a morning in November. My experiences with turkeys involved competing with cousins to see who could get one to answer you and commenting on their beauty while participating in my favorite sport, which was whitetail deer hunting. I shot my first and only turkey when I was 10 with my dad, trying out my Christmas gift that year, a 257 Roberts Plus P. I must say that the memory was fuzzy and the glory of the spring turkeys had been forgotten. My main attraction, and you mamas will get this, to the hunt that morning was the fact that my husband had initiated it, made it happen, got the kids with grandparents down the road, and had all the gear prepared in an effort to sell me on the fun of turkey hunting, and to impress upon me, so I was giving him a hard time, and he always takes guys. He wanted to impress upon me that I was his #1 hunting partner. But if he could get me done on April 1st, then he'd have 29 days left to hunt for himself and with friends. The walk to the blind was soggy and very dark. I hauled two metal folding chairs, which were banging together when I slid through the mud. So much for being quiet. But I did visualize them being great protection against a mountain lion or a hog that can be jumping out at any time. Glenn lugged a 12 gauge in his ultimate guide box. His guide box had everything needed for a hunting trip after I put some chapstick, toilet paper, and drinks and snacks in it. For today's adventure, he had all types of devices to call in turkeys. As we slowed down to walk more quietly, I was very aware that it was April Fool's Day and found myself brainstorming ways to get my dad. It was a rich holiday for tradition in my family, and my sister and brothers had already left me messages on my cell phone that morning to remind me of the date and wishing me luck to get dad. Our dad was the ultimate prankster, and every year he would try to get us, and it would always backfire. And they weren't at the ranch that weekend, so I was feeling the pressure. I decided that if I couldn't come up with anything elaborate, I would call him after the hunt and say that I killed some kind of massive wild turkey just to fool him. We arrived at the blind just as Glenn checked out the ground blind to make sure there were no unwelcome guests, and I glanced up in the trees and hoped we'd be so lucky as to have turkeys roosting right above us. Our kids had helped us set up this blind the day before in what we thought would be the perfect spot. It was along a bottom that trickled from recent flooding, and it overlooked a big green open area. It was also within about 200 yards of a creek where turkeys were usually roosting in the big elms and post oaks. Daylight was cracking in Caldwell County, Texas, as we got into the blind and got situated. The second we sat down, the legs of the chairs sunk down about 4 inches. Forgetting my boots that morning was a big mistake, as my tennis shoes were soaked to the socks. By the time I had the shotgun loaded and my mask on, there was already enough light to start scanning and listening. So far, it was just a hoot owl, tree frogs, and crickets. The decoys we put out the day before continued to startle me each time I glanced their direction. The tom looked so authentic because Glenn had attached a real 8-inch beard to it. The hen looked like any hen I had seen in the wild. And I smiled as I remembered our 4-year-old boy and 2-year-old girl chasing each other with the decoys when we were setting them up yesterday. I hoped they were still asleep, and I visualized their pretty dreaming faces. "I'll cook for you! Who cooked for you all?" was the tune ringing over and over from the owl that was quite close. That's what my grandpa used to say they were saying. Then it seemed like all the birds on the ranch came alive at once to say good morning and tell him that it was their turn. And it was officially daylight. I had to keep reminding myself that we were turkey hunting and that spotting a deer, although thrilling, was not what we were there for. As the morning light took over the shadows, I wondered at what point a turkey would consider it safe to jump down. I could make out some cows at about 100 yards, so it seemed to me that we should have already heard some activity. Maybe the yelping coyotes we heard on our walk to the blind had kept them in the trees. Maybe all the flooding had disturbed their roosting spots, and my husband and I were just up for some quality time together. I sure was hoping for a gobble because we could have quality time back at the bunkhouse. Just then, both of our faces lit up as the sound-off began on the creek bottom. One exaggerated gobble after another, and the hunt had begun. We decided the noise came from at least 4 spots on the creek. Glenn got out the box call and started yelping to see if we could get any response, and several gobblers answered. And so he kept enticing. I had read that a tom's optimal situation is to have the hen come to him. And so we were playing hard to get in hopes that one of those gobblers would finally give in and head our direction. This went on for quite a while with plenty of gobbles, but none of them were getting closer. So Glenn tried the mouth call for a while, and the turkeys liked that too, but they still were keeping their distance. I started to think about what a distinct noise a turkey has, and I realized that the gobbles echoing that morning was the same sound my ancestors probably heard as far back as 1827 on this same creek bottom. Yet the letdown I felt wasn't the same because we weren't depending on this bird for protein like they would have been. Let's see. I'm trying to skip a little bit. I started talking about barbecue. We can get barbecue in town in Lockhart. All right, we started to hear our kids making a noise at the house down the road. I'm not the most patient hunter in the world, so I began to think that maybe we should head towards the gobbles. And I told Glenn, I said, 5 more minutes and we head to the bottom 40. And before I could finish the sentence, Glenn said 2. So 3 minutes later, we were hugging a tree line towards the creek bottom in the direction of the turkeys. Our plan was to stop every so often at a tree and try some clucks. So the first stop was at a tree about 30 yards from the blind. So we're gonna start acting this out, Glenn. Let me see. Okay, never mind. Okay. All right, here's our blind. Here's our blind, okay? So we make it about 30 yards over to the next tree. And Glenn starts doing the call, and one particular tom gobbled about 4 or 5 times in quick succession.
In the wrong direction.
And that was a new response, so we kind of decided to focus in on him. So Glenn clucked again with the mouth collar, and he answered again with like a 5 gobble series, and it seemed a little closer. Another gobble volley confirmed it. He was coming in, and we are not in the blind anymore. We began to try to figure out how we were both going to hide behind this tree and be in a shooting position. We still couldn't see him, but we knew that he was behind a stand of trees about 100 yards away. And then all of a sudden, Glenn said, he had his mouth collar in his mouth. I could hardly understand it, but he said, uh-oh, he might go to the decoys. So we're at the tree, there's the blind, decoys are on the other side of the blind. So it was hard to understand him, but I immediately realized that the decoys are on the other side of the blind. If this gobbler made his way to the decoys and not the clucks, we wouldn't have any cover. I wouldn't be able to get him. So we decided to make a run back for the blind. I went first, staying low in the trees and running as fast as I could, keeping low, but keeping smooth with the 12 gauge and my shoes sloshing around, and I dove into the blind. I prayed that the tom was still in the brush, and my clumsy sprint went undetected. 5 gobbles was my answer. I unzipped the door completely so that Glenn would have a bigger hole to dive into than I just did, and I motioned for him to come. But instead of running to the blind, I watched him just crouch down real slow with the tree and become one with the tree, and I knew what that meant. The gobbler was in his field of vision, and he wasn't going to be coming back to the blind. So I just zipped the door back up, and then I kind of panicked for a second because I realized I was going to be on my own in making a decision. I don't like doing that. I like some confirmation of another pair of eyes. So Glenn continued the 1 cluck call, and the tom would answer with his gobble song. I searched the stand of brush over and over to spot him, and then I decided I better just get in a position now while he was still behind the trees. The camo mesh windows were velcroed to keep the mosquitoes out and conceal it. Having no idea what side he was going to walk up on, I started opening some slits here and there to give some places to stick the gun barrel out. And I tried to time the noise every time he'd gobble, do a window. And Glenn was over there making faces at me like,
I was yelling at her.
However, I decided that making sounds now was better than movements later, as they have such great eyesight. I double-checked to make sure there was a shell in the chamber, and then I locked my eyes on the caliche road just in front of the trees. To my surprise, I began to notice something. My palms were getting a little balmy. I was breathing heavy. I had butterflies in my tummy, and I wasn't breathing regularly. What is that called?
Deer fever.
Yes, I had it over a turkey. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even seen him yet, and I had what was known as buck fever. Finally, I caught movement on the road, and there he stood, fully fanned with every feather fluffed, He was a lot taller than I imagined. And I could see his beard with my own eyes at about 80 yards. The binoculars were worth fun. He instantly let me look him over with a 360 turn. It reminded me of the Hokey Pokey song where you turn yourself around. And he kept making these circles, and then every now and then Glenn would cluck once to keep his interest. And then he did some pacing back and forth on the road, just going up and down the road, dragging his tail feathers, and then he'd do a turnaround like he's on a runway. This exposition, this was like a 10-minute show of him showing off. Huh?
I didn't think it was ever gonna end.
Yeah, it's a 10-minute show. He's crouched up against a tree
He
over
thought he
here.
was a pretty bad dude.
But if things had been over at that point in time, and I know y'all probably feel the same way, I would have been so satisfied with that little glimpse into God's creation that we had that morning. But his whole body goggles were so serious, I knew it was a matter of time before he would come down the hill towards us and I'd get a closer look. All of a sudden, I couldn't find him on the road anywhere. And I just had a hard time thinking after all that he was going to give up. Glenn quit clucking and was silent, so there was no more gobbles. Then I spotted him. He was absolutely quiet, coming right towards me. He was still fully fanned, just as confident as he could be, doing the turkey two-step. Two steps one way, 2 steps another, but coming right at me. And with each shuffle, he would whip his beard around. It was then I noticed that my shooting holes that I had opened up had all fallen closed. And I took another look at that magnificent turkey strutting my way, and I decided that I would just make my own holes whenever I pulled the trigger. But to pull off that shot, because I could no longer get the barrel out the window, I had to try to get in the back of the blind to get some room to hold the gun up. He was still, okay, let's see. He was still coming straight for me. And then here's where we tried to have this little discussion. Is he gonna be entertained by the noise that Glenn's making and go that way, or the decoys? What do you think? What he sees or what he hears?
Decoys.
He's coming straight at me. Which way is he gonna go? So whichever way he came meant that I had to get in a different back corner of the blind. And then all of a sudden I had this realization that if he came to Glenn, I didn't have a good backdrop. Glenn was in the way. So I was hoping that he would come to the decoys. That's Hunter Safety 101 right there. And I kind of like him. So he kept me guessing as he took 2 steps toward my guide and then 2 steps toward the decoy, over and over till he was about 25 yards in front of me. And for a while I thought he was indecisive, but as he whipped his beards through the air and dramatically turned towards the decoys, get a call, I realized that it was all part of the show for the hen and I would possibly have a shot at him. Every feather shimmered in what had now become a sunny day. A little Marvin Gaye song came to mind as the Indian paintbrushes made like a red carpet for him to walk on in the direction of the decoy. There would be one little clump of small elms that he would pass on the other side of him, and then he would come out at the decoys. And the second he went behind the elms, I hit the ground, crawled to the back of the blind. My plan was to use a chair as an armrest, but I couldn't get them out of the ground. They were stuck in the mud, so I had to do it free-handed. I took the safety off, and from a kneeling position, I slowly raised the gun up, already pointed, and I put it up against the camo mesh, and I had the bee waiting for him on the other side of the elms. My distance was not as clear with the mesh. It was kind of going in and out, but I could see his shape coming through the trees. My arm was shaky, and the barrel was moving more than I wanted it to, but he was not going to be rushed, doing his little passionate shuffle. Reminders and words of wisdom flashed through my head. Like those of y'all who've been raised hunting, you hear all these little words of wisdom. It occurred to me that I was not on my own at all. I thought of past summer days just up the hill with my grandpa Charlie, shooting a .22 at a soda can until it disintegrated. He taught me about pressing the gun into my shoulder. I recalled the hours of my pawpaw quietly watching a cork in the water. He taught me about patience. I recall a childhood memory on this creek of my mom and a .410 and a copperhead, and she taught me to shoot to kill. I remembered all the calming words from my dad with waiting on a broadsided shot to squeeze the trigger, squeeze, squeeze. I was amazingly calm and steady now, as I knew my chance would come in just another second. The last reminder that popped in my head was Glenn saying, "Cover the bead," covering his head with the bead. Bam! I instinctively pumped another shell into the chamber in anticipation of a chase, but he fell right over. No flopping, no chasing. Glenn came hollering up, "You got him, you got him, you got him!" And I barreled out of the blind and attacked him with a hug. And as he ran over to Tom, I said, "I thought I wasn't going to be able to shoot him if he came between us." And Glenn said, "And I thought I was going to get shot if he came between us." As we began to admire him, my husband started counting beards like you would count points on a deer. He said, "He has 7 stinking beards, Cherylnn. You killed a turkey with 7 beards." I had no idea that turkeys did that, and I didn't even realize the significance of it at that time. I just thought I had killed some freaking turkey. We let out a few Aggie whoops to let my parents know that we got something, and I dialed my dad's cell phone and hoped that my hyperventilation would make him take me seriously. And I said, "Dad, this ain't no April Fool's. Come see the turkey I just shot." As I knelt down beside him, it was the first time I had seen his feathers down next to his body. I felt his worn spurs and saw that one of them was like halfway knocked off because he had been a fighter. His feet were wet, and glancing up, I could see the exact meandering path that he had taken through the dew. I was feeling how soft his neck was when Glenn hollered, "Did you shoot a hole through my blind? I can't believe you shot a hole through my blind." Our kids heard the shot, so my mom got them dressed, and they came down and wanted to reenact the hunt, and they had a blast following his dew trail down the hill and falling down by him. I got to share with them the same talk that my dad would give us kids over a harvested animal, the one that y'all probably had about respecting God's creation, treating the animal like a gift, and how hunting is part of our heritage. My son was more interested in putting his head through the hole in the blind, and my daughter was trying to pull out tail feathers and poke his eyes. But we planned, and we do, and we've had that talk many times before. So I was just going to tell you a few things about him. He had 7 beards, and the way the National Wild Turkey Federation scores deer, like the Boone and Crockett for deer, scores turkey, is they do total beard length. And so when you have the first beard starting out at 7 inches and the last one being almost 12, when you add all those up, it scores way higher than like a 12 or 13-inch beard. So you take the total beard length, the length of the spurs, and its weight, and he ended up being the largest Rio Grande turkey in the world. And it didn't last very long. Wow. Tell him he's not number 1 anymore. But he was for a couple of years. Wow. The world record Rio Grande turkey.
You're still the only woman.
Okay.
She owns the woman.
Did y'all know that turkeys had multiple beards or could? I mean, I thought I'd heard of doubles. But it's a genetic thing, like a deer would have a drop tine. And so they could have multiple beards. There was one on the King Ranch, on Kennedy County, that was an 8 beard. But besides that, I've got a triple. It's a genetic thing at our place in Caldwell County in Lockhart. So his name is Siete, because he has 7 beards. And he made the trip here doing this the whole way in the back seat.